This is our first parent and caregiver event. My name is Helen. I'm the Director of Community and International Training at the Ackerman Institute. So happy that you all are joining us tonight. So we have 1 hour with Michael Davidovits, and I'm really excited for him to share his insights and wisdom with you all. If you have questions, please just post them in the Q&A box. You'll see that in the bottom bar in your screen. And at the end of Michael's webinar presentation, we'll have some time at the end for your questions, and we'll try to get to all of them. Also, please do be advised that we are recording tonight's session, but you will remain anonymous. So yeah, but please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Michael.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you this evening. I hope you're all finding ways to stay cool. Just a quick introduction of myself. I am on faculty at the Ackerman Institute. For those of you who don't know Ackerman, we are a family therapy training institute. So we train people who are already therapists and who are interested in specializing in family and couples therapy. I have a particular interest in working with adolescents and have been running a project for adolescents and their families for a number of years. Also have a private practice and do some teaching elsewhere. So we don't have a ton of time together, so I'm just going to jump right in. And as Helen said, I will try to leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and I will try to get to them. You know, I mean, the backdrop for this presentation obviously is the hopefully, you know, end of the pandemic and the return to normal. You know, of course, time never goes backwards, so we don't return to anything. We only go forwards. And, you know, so we certainly have less anxiety, I think, is in the air than there was a year ago. But, you know, there's still some unknowns and some uncertainty about what life is going to look like as we go back to work, and especially for kids as they go back to school. So it's still an anxious time, and it's still a time that is fraught with a lot of uncertainty. So, you know, talking about, I mean, you know, adolescence can be an anxious time in general, in the best of circumstances. Anxiety kind of gets into the family as kids go through adolescence. So sort of talking, I want to start off talking a little bit about, you know, what happens as to relationships when there's stress, obviously, particularly between parents and kids, and want to talk a little bit about some ideas for undoing some of the cycles of interaction, the arguments, the conflicts that happen when things are stressful in families, and how that looks, what happens, why it happens, and of course, you know, what we can try to do to make that better. So, you know, we all know that, you know, in response to anxiety, people, actually really all living beings, you know, have a fight or flight response. And, fight and flight can look different in different circumstances for different people. Some people get angry, some people seek control. Some people, in response to anxiety and uncertainty, move to a position of criticism and judgment. You don't often think about that as a fight position in response to stress, but often it is. And also in the context of relationships, when there's anxiety, people engage in flight, which could look like withdrawal, people sealing themselves up in rooms, physically removing themselves, or emotionally removing themselves, shutting down, not engaging in conversation. Within the specific context of parent-child relationships, and just sort of as a sidebar, people often ask me, what do I, when I say adolescence, what do I mean? It's kind of I'd say like beginning somewhere around 11 and ending whenever it ends for people. Some people remain adolescents for a long time in life. But generally, we're talking about up until about 18, maybe into their kids into their early 20s. So anxiety for kids relationally, that is in their relationship with parents, there's sort of two main categories, I guess you could say. There's anxiety that has to do with threats to support and connection. That comes up when kids feel criticized, when they feel misunderstood, when they feel blamed, when they feel like they're being cast as bad kids, particularly when they feel like that's done unfairly, which usually means that, we're failing to see all the good things they're doing, and we're focusing on the bad things that they're doing. There's also anxiety comes up, and I think we think about this a little bit less when there's threats to autonomy, right? Adolescents really, they need to separate, and they also need to stay connected to us, right? They need our love and our support and our understanding. And when either of those things get threatened within this relationship, it causes stress and anxiety. And threats to autonomy include feeling controlled, feeling overwhelmed by parental anxiety. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Who are you doing that with? And kids are like, I don't know what to do to help you with how worried you are about me. And it feels like our anxiety can feel very heavy to them. I think in the past year, kids have felt a lot of threats to autonomy, and a lot of the stress that we see, particularly in adolescence, can be chalked up to the threats to autonomy that they've been living with, right? Being shut in at home, on screens, even though things are opening up right now, a lot, people getting vaccinated and so forth. I think some of that anxiety persists, in a strange way, because I think kids feel their own anxiety about going back to school, which, they don't necessarily talk to us about, as a threat to their own autonomy, right? So it's like their own anxiety is a threat to their own autonomy. And what do kids do when they feel a threat to autonomy? They take it out on us, right? One of the best ways to feel like you have some power and autonomy is to drive your parents crazy. For parents to feel safe in a relationship with their teenage children, we need to, and I say we because I have two adolescent kids at home, so I'm not only study this, but I experience it in my own life. We really need to make sure that, to feel that we have an ongoing way to take care of our kids and to have a meaningful, positive impact in their lives. this is always an issue when it comes to adolescence. Like what our adolescent kids need from us is an open and to some extent confusing question, right? Like, it's, as I always think of the trajectory of parenting is, starts off like kids need us all the time. It's very like physically exhausting. But what it is that we have to do for them is relatively straightforward, right? Like little babies cry, they need one of 3 or 4 things. As kids get older, that balance shifts, and kids need a lot less of our physical involvement in their lives. In fact, they may even push against that. And what they need from us becomes a lot more confusing and less clear. All of which is to say, parenting adolescents under the best of circumstances is, it's a bit of a challenge. I think we've all probably experienced that to be a little bit more of a challenge as the world has presented us with circumstances, and hasn't been clear how to keep our kids safe in a pandemic, how to help them with Zoom school, how to help them manage their anxiety. We're trying to manage our own. And again, like the residue of that, at least in my experience talking to families, it persists to some extent. So we experience anxiety as parents when our kids, we feel our kids aren't going to be safe in the world. And particularly when we don't know how to help them. And when there's some threat to our sense of competence and efficacy as parents, like we feel like bad parents because our kids are mad at us, because they're not taking in our excellent advice, because they're doing things that we're really worried about and we don't know how to make them stop. That fosters our anxiety. We tend typically to move to warning. Like, I think, when we feel anxious about our kids and we start to feel disconnected from them, as sometimes happens in adolescence. And I think this happens in relationships in general. When people feel disconnected, they try to take by force what they're not able to get through love, right? So we try to get our connection back with our kids by assuming a power position, by warning them, by lecturing them, by criticizing them, and then moving, when that doesn't work, to negative consequences of different kinds. As the consequences, if they don't work, like, we keep looking for consequences that are going to work. We kind of ratchet up the consequences until we've, in search of something that maybe will get their attention, and, I think we ourselves lose track of the fact that what we're really trying to do is get back to a place where we're having a meaningful impact and we feel connected to our kids as parents, that we're taking care of them and that they're taking us in. We're trying to find a way in. The anxiety position of adolescents and parents, unfortunately, once they pick up speed, can tend to play off of one another, right? As adolescents are having a hard time finding a way to assert their autonomy while staying connected to us, will push, they'll push us, they'll push on the autonomy harder. This, they'll withdraw, they'll become provocative, they'll become oppositional. And as parents, as we feel ourselves failing to make an impact and take care of our kids and to really be able to, connect with them and have a meaningful impact, we move to control, which then adolescents perceive as a a threat to their autonomy. They push back more. We get more anxious about our relationships, and we're kind of off to the races. So this can be a cycle of interaction, that often, really can pick up speed, and it really is cyclical. And I think we, at some point or another, almost all of us get caught up into this cycle with our adolescent kids to one extent or another. I think, when that happens, right, and kids push for their autonomy against us, this is when they become impulsive. This is when they can get into trouble. This is when, like most of the work I do as a family therapist happens with families in which this cycle has really picked up speed. Parents are really desperate to get their kids back, to have some kind of impact. Kids are really like moving to a position where, like, I don't even care about you anymore. I'm just going to do my own thing. In doing their own thing, they're getting into all kinds of trouble. That's usually, like how people come in to talk to me. I think what we forget about, as we move into relationships that are causing us anxiety, and as we are moving into, and as the relationship, as the disconnection sort of gives way to a power struggle in which people are fighting or fleeing, we forget that that there is another really powerful way that we as humans have for calming anxiety, and that is to take refuge in a secure relationship, right? Like, I mean, we all know this, right? Like, if you're feeling really anxious and you have a conversation with a friend, or somebody gives you a hug, or you feel really held and connected, your anxiety goes away. Like, that is such a powerful way for us to alleviate, in many ways, much more powerful than fighting or fleeing, is for us to connect. The trick is, when our relationship is the thing that's causing us anxiety, how do we get back to a connection that's going to resolve the anxiety? Because the relationship is causing us anxiety, and everything in us is saying, fight for this, run from this. Nothing in us is saying, open your heart and open your arms to this person. Yeah, we may have that idea theoretically, that that's what we want, but the anxiety does not direct us towards that, which is why these kinds of cycles can go on so long, right? And it's not just between adolescents and parents. We see this in other kinds of relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, the ways in which people look for power and forget, like, really the thing that's going to resolve the pain and insecurity in the relationship is getting back into some sense of security and loving connection with the person that is making us feel scared. But, again, like, we're unlikely to open our arms, open ourselves up to love when somebody is scaring us relationally. Certainly with our kids, it's really only by restoring connection that we as parents are going to resolve the anxiety in the relationship, so that we can really, once again, have a positive impact. Our kids will take us in when they feel less anxious with us, and we will find a way in with them when we are less anxious with them and move in more towards connection. So how do we do that? As these cycles of interaction really start, picking up speed. So to me, this is like, I think this is a place where we can really get stuck as parents, myself included, right? Like, I can talk about this. Do I follow my advice in real life? Sometimes not. In general, as kids move from adolescence, move from early childhood, tween years into adolescence, punishing with consequences and correcting with harsh criticism have diminishing returns. They're less and less effective. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. And again, it doesn't stop us from trying, even when it's failing. Like, we think, what's a better, I must be choosing the wrong consequence. What's a better consequence? Consequences are always a threat to autonomy for adolescents. And when adolescents feel like their autonomy is being threatened, they fight and they flee. They tend not to say, oh, gee, I'm getting a negative consequence. Let me work with you on that, right? They experience it as a threat and they push away. And the more powerful and heavy and oppressive the consequence is, the more they tend to run away. Now, it's not true of all adolescents. And if your adolescent child responds to consequences, I don't have a philosophical or moral position against it. By all means, if it works, do it. I just, I find in my own experience that often it doesn't work, and parents are left scratching their head why, feeling really frustrated, and turn as their next thing they're going to try to a better consequence, and things just don't get better. Adolescents also, are more attracted to positive stimuli than they are deterred by negative stimuli. If our relationship with them becomes unpleasant, they tend less to figure out how to make it pleasant than they do figure out how to just go to something that's more fun. It's a way in which it's just developmentally, that's how the adolescent brain works. So all we're doing by punishing is rendering our relationship with them aversive. It's a place where they don't want to hang out. And so they're just going to want to get away from us rather than pay attention to the consequence and how to get a better thing going on for them. So what I really think about in talking to adolescents, I try to remember, first of all, that the adolescent brain is really just like the adult brain. They have a capacity for self-reflection. They have a capacity to think about their own self-interest. They have a capacity to think, consequentially, like, this is what I want, A, B, C, this is how I'm going to get there. They're just not as fluent with these capacities as an adult may be. Rather than lecturing adolescents and telling them what they're doing wrong, which is what I think so many of us end up turning to because we're scared and we want them to stop doing whatever they're doing that's making us scared, they actually need help thinking for themselves. If we can encourage them to think for themselves, it bolsters their autonomy, and we're also turning on those capacities that they need to have turned on rather than lecturing them. So I think about inviting kids to engage in self-assessment. I'll say in a second what I mean by that. Increase their sense of relational responsibility. I'll explain that too, and participate in planning. Self-assessment. How do you think you are doing? I think particularly when we're faced with a kid who's really engaging in bad behavior that seems to us to be just stupid, that we are really worried about, we don't think to ask them, how do you think you're doing? Because we figured if they have the capacity to think about what they were doing, they wouldn't be doing what they were doing in the first place. So I, as their parent, have to take out my index finger and tell them why they're doing wrong and what they should be doing instead, you know, and give them a lecture. I'm always, you know, like fascinated by the ways in which, like, if you ask something like this question, how do you think you're doing? I'm worried about you. Do you worry about yourself? Like, you can see sometimes the light bulb turn on. Like, actually, yeah, I am worried about myself, right? I kind of want to graduate high school and I haven't gone to class like the last 2 weeks at all. So I'm not sure I'm on the right track. If you take that same kid and you take out your index finger and say, if you want to graduate high school, you better blah, 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 blah. Their ears closed. They just hear blah, 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 blah. You're a bad kid, and it goes nowhere often. And again, I mean, I'm generalizing. Every kid is different. Is another question I like to ask. What do we understand? What am I not getting? Because I look at what you're doing and I get worried about you, but you aren't. Help me understand yourself. Help me understand you, right? Again, this is a self-assessment question that gets kids thinking about themselves. So self-assessment. How do you think you are doing rather than lecturing? Adolescents are highly motivated by relational consequences. They want to be loved. They want to be thought highly of. They want to get along well in their relationships. We think so often that they only care about their peers, like they're motivated with regard to their relationships with their peers, and that's certainly true. They're very motivated by that. It's like new and exciting. But they're also motivated to get along with us. They give up on getting along with us when this cycle of interaction picks up speed and they just can't figure out how to get along with us. They can't figure out how to help us with our anxiety. They can't figure out how to help us feel better in the relationship. They can't figure out how to make a difference and make this relationship go better. And then they say, you know what, I don't care about my relationship with you. And, you know, like they move away. Never take that at face value, right? Our kids desperately need us. At what point, I always ask parents, at what point do you stop needing to have a good relationship with your parents, right? Never. So, of course, adolescents care about having a good relationship with us. It may seem like they don't. It may seem like they don't care. It may seem like they actually care about inflicting pain on us. Don't take that at face value. They want to get along with us. They just maybe can't figure out how to, and figure out how to in particular in a way that's not going to jeopardize their need for autonomy, right? In other words, the thing I need to do for you is to do everything that you're telling me to do and never do anything that I think I should do. That's too much for me, right? So maybe they'll then push against the relationship. I think on our end, you know, we often worry about asking children to meet our relational needs, like what we need from them. I really encourage parents to tell their kids what you need from them. They actually need to know. This is what you can do to make this a better relationship, because they want to know what to do to make they're in pain as much as we are if the relationship isn't going well. It's just they express it differently. You know, the parent-child relationship is not symmetrical, right? In other words, we take care of them a lot more than they take care of us, but it is reciprocal. Our kids give us things emotionally, and they need to give us things, and we need them to give us things. what we call self-esteem, right? And you think, how do I build self-esteem? Self-esteem, in my opinion, comes when you feel like you have the ability to make a positive impact. When you have something to offer, something of value inside yourself, and you can give it to the world, and there's a response. And there's no context in which that means more and matters more than with the people we love, right? When we make the people we love smile, that's when we feel the best about ourselves. Do our children need to do that for us? Absolutely they do. Of course, there's inappropriate ways for kids to be taking care of their parents. I think the boundaries are pretty clear around what those are. There is age appropriate and age inappropriate ways for kids to be taking care of their parents. Again, I don't know if I need to go on at length about where those lines are. Crossing those lines causes harm, but within those lines, it's incredibly important. At 3 months old, usually most babies learn to smile, like they develop the ability to smile. They actually learn it. After that, we look for their smile. We want it and we need it, and they want to give it to us, right? So that back and forth, that reciprocity is important, an important element of connection in parent-child relationships, as it is in any relationship. So I ask kids, what ideas do you have for making this relationship better? What would you like to do so that we could have a better time? So we could get along better? Here's what would make me happy. Here's what would work for me. But I always ask the kid first. I think planning with is so much more powerful with kids than planning for. In other words, to ask a kid, what do you think? What's your idea about what to do with that? I would much rather have a kid come up with a plan that's a ridiculous plan, that's not going to work, but they might try, than to have a kid come up with a plan for them that they're not even going to listen to. Younger kids, they may need some help. You can make a menu, like for younger adolescents who are having a hard time coming up with a plan, or their plans are just, so off base. Give them a menu. Here are some things that you could do. Which one of those things would you like to try? So you make the menu, you come up with the choices. This gives them an opportunity to exercise autonomy. It gives them an opportunity to participate in the relationship and to do something for the relationship. And they're engaged. They're feeling better inside the relationship. If you do want to levy consequences, and some parents feel it's important part of their parenting philosophy. I often say, like, parenting kids, it's not like baking cookies. Like, you follow a recipe and it all just comes out as long as you follow the recipe. There's a million different ways to raise kids. I don't know which one is the right way to do it. Like, there are some ideas. I have some things I've seen work, some things don't work. If you feel like levying consequences and punishing is an important part of what it means to be a parent, then it's an important part of what it means for you to be a parent. I find that it works better if you invite adolescents to participate in developing a plan. So what do you think the consequence for this should be? The time to have this conversation is not when your kid has just done something that really pisses you off, right? Then you're reacting, obviously, from a place of frustration and anger. It comes out as power. It comes out as control. It's not. And whatever you're saying at that moment, are you going to be able to stick to it consistently, right? One of the biggest sort of mistakes I see parents do, and we all do this, I do this, is, in anger, you say, that's it, you're grounded forever, right? We're not going to stick to that. It's a punishment that has no meaning. It's a consequence that we're not going to stick to. We need a plan that's going to be consistent and that will feel fair to the adolescent, and that we're actually going to be able ourselves to follow. And those are not usually, the consequences that we come up with sort of in the heat of the moment. Better to take a break and come back to it and make a plan when you're able to really think about what you're able to stick to. And this includes, dealing with screens. I just want to say a few words about dealing with screens. This is obviously a particular issue, like whatever rules that you had in your house around screens, 15 months ago, probably went out the window some point over the last year and a half. And now you're trying to look for a way to put it back in the bottle. Awfully hard. I think all of us are looking for a way to do that. We're looking for a way to do it for ourselves, right? We all ended up spending too much time on screens, and they have become an integral part of our lives, as is evidenced by what we're doing right now. I don't know if using screens and having screens part of human society is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's here, and we don't really get to make that choice. It's part of our lives, and it's also brand new, right? My kids like to remind me that I'm very old, but I'm really not that old. And when I was an adolescent, we had two phones in our home. They were both attached by a cord to the wall. And you could pick up the phone. If nobody else was on the phone, you could call your friend. We had one of those rotary dials. And if your friend wasn't home or didn't pick up for whatever reason, you called back later. We had no answering machines. Somebody else might be on the phone. You might get a busy signal. There was no private cell phones. There was no way to text. I say all that because we're still trying to figure out as a society, as a species, what the right way to handle screens is. And none of us really know for sure how to make this healthy rather than unhealthy, what role this should play in our lives. So we're all kind of, everything that we thought we knew, it's all being undone at this point after the pandemic. I think when people say, what's the right way to handle screens? What are the rules? We're all making up these rules as we go along, quite frankly. I also think it's important, and this goes to how hard, what kind of conversations we have with our kids around screens. The impulse to pick up a screen is the same as the impulse to connect with another human being, right? That's true if you're texting your friend, you're looking at Instagram, you're looking at TikTok, you're looking at that news alert that CNN just sent me. It's connecting with the world. And we pick up the screen, it's like a message for me from the world. It's really hard to ignore that. The world wants to tell me something. My friend wants to tell me something. We all want to be connected. We all want to be plugged in. And the screen does that for us. It's a healthy impulse. Whether or not screens are the best way to channel that impulse is another story. For teenagers in particular, screens are also a means of holding power and autonomy. It's my own, I got my own phone. It's my own private world that I talk to my friends on. So when we think about taking screens away from our teenagers, we have to think about what it is that we're actually asking them to do. That's my point, right? And why. It's a big deal, right? And are we willing to follow the same rules that we're asking our teenagers to follow? Are you willing to not look at your phone when CNN just sent you a really interesting news alert? Special for you. So I really think, whatever your philosophy around screens, not at mealtime, not at bedtime. We all know the research about how screens interfere with sleep, not at family time, just at certain times of the day, not on the weekends, all the time. Whatever your philosophy is, talk with your kids about what your thoughts are. Think about why that's what you think, and use a collaborative approach that doesn't threaten autonomy. What's your idea about how screens should be used? What do you think our limits around screens should be? I've always found, oddly enough, that if you ask a teenager what you think their limits around screens should be, they actually will outdo you in what you were thinking of. They'll be like, well, I don't think we should ever have screens after, like they actually, not always, but they actually overcompensate, which I find interesting. I don't really, but I found it so often. I don't know exactly how to explain it. But using a collaborative approach is so important, specifically because of this last point. You're asking them, when you ask a teenager to give up their phone, you're asking them to give up their autonomy, and they are going to push against that. So you have to ask them in a way that also honors their need for autonomy. One thing that definitely doesn't work, which I do all the time, is I see my kid on her phone, both my kids are girls, I get upset. They should be doing their homework. They've been on the screen all day. Like some idea enters in my head and I'm like, give me that phone, right? When you do that to a teenager, it's like cutting off their left hand and they will howl in pain and you will not have a good interaction, right? The right time to have the conversation is with the screens down in a moment of calm. I think there's no doubt in my mind, like the screens get wired into our neurocircuitry precisely because they get wired into the same circuitry that leads us want to connect with other people. For teenagers, that wiring is that much more intense. I also think that we have to understand that when you ask a kid to give up his or her screen, they don't necessarily know what to do with themselves. Like so many kids today are overscheduled, always on their phones, and they just, I think all of us, like we've forgotten how to be bored. We've forgotten how to begin with boredom and then figure out something to do. To me, to whatever extent, I do think that screens have a negative impact on human society. I think this is one of the negative impacts, right? We've forgotten how to be bored. We've forgotten how to have empty space. Our kids have definitely forgotten how to be bored. Overscheduled New York City kids in particular, I think, have forgotten how to be bored. And they will default to sleep when they don't have their screens. When given any free space, they'll always default to sleep or screens. And they need our help. They just need our help. We can't expect them to navigate that completely on their own. You can't just say, give up your screen and not help them figure out what else they're going to do. And you know, I think there's been a lot of, you know, certainly over the last year, there's been a lot of arguments and misconceptions and misunderstandings around that between parents and kids. So just a couple of other things, you know, in terms of meeting our kids' needs, and particularly sort of in a timely way. I think this has been a confusing year to parent adolescent kids because of the screens, because of anxiety, the ways in which anxiety has entered into relationships. This one in particular, I think has caused parents a lot of confusion. And I've seen this in my own kids, you know, who like all of a sudden, like my 16-year-old wants to like sit cuddling with me. It's like, I don't mind, it's great. But it's also confusing. Like you were, you know, like wanted to have nothing to do with me like a few months ago. I think that we see, I mean, certainly in younger adolescents, you see this oscillation, you know, between bids for autonomy and bids for being taken care of. It's normal. I think when anxiety enters into our lives, you know, maybe we all did a bit of regression over this past year. And I think the flip side of that is what we're seeing now is, at least what I'm seeing, is the flip side is a more intense push for autonomy. Having regressed back a little bit to needing us in a dependency place, or gone back and forth, like getting dependent and then pushing really hard, right? It's like, I got really dependent. I wanted to sit next to you and get comfort. Now that makes me really uncomfortable because what about my autonomy? So I'm going to run into my room and slam the door. And, you know, so we've seen a lot of that kind of confusion. And what we're seeing, what I'm seeing a little bit more now is kids really pushing hard towards autonomy. And, you know, like, that's disconcerting. We were all looking forward to having terrific, some exciting summer vacations with our kids this summer. We couldn't do much last summer, you know, and now like they're pushing hard for their autonomy. I think if you remember that the dependency needs haven't gone away, if you can honor both, you know, we can get back to some kind of equilibrium towards that. I really encourage families to connect around anxiety. You know, in particular, you know, when COVID, like last March, when COVID, a year and a half ago, when COVID was just hitting, everybody was freaking out a little bit. But people were just freaking out about different things. And everybody assumed that the other person was kind of freaking out about the same thing that they were freaking out about. And that's not the case. And I think we're at another moment like that, although the anxiety may be a little bit less intense or mixed in, sort of marbled in with a lot of excitement about, you know, being able to go outside without a mask. People are still anxious, and they're anxious about different things. So we really need to make space for that. Parents and kids are often not anxious about the same things. So can we bring that out to the open? Can we make room for difference? And can we help each other? Can we really have a conversation where we help kids and also they help us? You know, they help us and they hear our anxiety. It helps, you know, it helps kids to hear our anxieties. First of all, they know, they're incredibly tuned in. And when they hear us name it, whatever misconceptions they have, which are usually like, it's about me, that is me, adolescent kid, you know, there's a chance to correct that. Final thing I want to say, before I take some questions, you know, schedule time to relax with your kids. If they say, I don't want to spend time with you, say, what could be so bad? Saturday between 10 and 12, we're going to do X. Have fun. They may push against you. They probably will push against you. It means more than you think it means, right? It means a lot. Don't forget, right? They need us. And they need us to make time for the relationship because, like they get busy pushing against it. So I really think that's like, like it builds the relationship. And if you're, if you want to have, like, if you're worried about your kid and you want to have impact, if the relationship is good, that's where they're going to really begin to take you out. So I'll stop sharing. And see if there are any questions. If anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and put it in the Q&A.
I'm not seeing any questions just yet, but please feel free to add any if any have come up. Michael, I so appreciate when you capture the complexity of parenting adolescents and how, from the parents and caregivers perspective, how perplexing and challenging it can be in managing our own anxieties and emotions in relationship, and to really normalize that. We do have a question, how to prepare for September in terms of a new norm?
Yeah, I mean, such an important question. So, let's assume everybody's going back to school in person. That's what I'm assuming. Let's assume that there's a whole host of anxieties around that. I think kids are, so there's things that we're worried about, and there's things that kids are worried about. I think, like the sort of that kind of conversation I mentioned at the end, next to last slide, to name this, like it's great. We're going back to, we're going back to school. We're getting back into life. It's such a wonderful thing. But you know what? It's like, it's also kind of a little bit scary and uncertain. What are the things that you're worried about? And I'm going to share with you the things that I'm worried about. And what can we do for each other to help each other worry less? I think that, kids are worried a lot about being in a school with all of their friends and being seen and looked at again. Like they're dying for it. They're so eager for it, but it's really stressful, for kids. And I think there's a ton of anxiety around that. Like maybe you can help them, maybe you can name that. Like, I know I'm a little bit worried about going back to the office and being around my coworkers again. Like, I've forgotten how to make small talk. Like, is there anything like that you're worried about? Sharing the anxieties, just voicing them, normalizing them. I don't know what's going to happen, but what can we do, like, to help each other out with this? Right now, like in the end of June, none of us really know exactly how it's going to be or how it's going to feel, even if we can assume that we're all going to be back there in school in person. So what we're really left with is just the anxieties. We can talk about those. Another question.
Yeah, great. We also have a question. Congratulations, Michael. How can you deal with a teenager when you try to spend time with him, but he doesn't want to?
Yeah, I mean, that's that happens a lot, right? And Look, like I said, my first point about that is don't take it at face value. Um, I think raising our kids in the city, we're at a terrible disadvantage compared to parents who get to raise their kids in the suburbs. Because if you raise your kid in the suburb, they need you to drive them places. And they will spend time with you in the car. And while you're with them in the car, they'll talk to you, right? We don't have that. They get on the subway, they're gone. But how can we recreate that? Let me walk you there. Like how about like we just spent a little bit of time, make it as little threatening as possible, as little as possible, sort of undermining their autonomy and their need and desire to do their own thing, as low stakes as possible. If you get a moment with them, don't do the, so how's school and how's it going with so-and-so? Like, don't interview, don't grill, too much anxiety. Just enjoy some time together. Find low stakes activities. Say, yeah, it's fine. Like, you can do your own thing on Saturday. Just help me out with the whatever. Cleaning the house, we'll put on music, we'll dance while we vacuum, like making dinner. Kids don't want to have face-to-face, like serious talks with their parents. It's not fun for them. Do an activity, and make it a low stakes activity.
Mm-hmm.
And keep trying, like they'll push, right? Our job is not to get pushed away.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and a similar question, I think around what can I do if my child doesn't want to talk, which sounds like kind of a similar tack, just patience, persistence.
Yeah, and don't make it like I think we we try to have these intense sit down conversations when we're worried about our kids. They're unlikely to talk to us in that moment. One of my favorite moments in family therapy is when a parent comes in with their kid and they say, okay, now we're in therapy, so talk. as though having another adult in the room is going to make any difference. They will talk to you while you're doing other things. They won't talk to you when you sit down and have an anxiety-laden, intense talk with them.
Mm. Great. Another question. Someone's just curious if you'll be sharing the slides.
Oh, I don't know. We can talk about that.
Okay.
It's possibility, sure.
Okay, great. Another question. How may I help a child that is not motivated to make connections with peers?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think we're going to encounter a lot of that in the fall. I think there's going to be a lot of kids who, if they tended towards social anxiety, last year was a relief. Next year is going to be hard. Pressure from parents around making friends for adolescents almost always backfires. I really hope that schools are aware of this and offer support around it. I think because that's the best place for it to happen. And are just aware, like a lot of kids are going to be struggling with this anxiety. I think as parents, we can share some of our own anxieties. Like, yeah, I've forgotten how to make small talk. I'm not sure, like how it's going to be for me and my coworkers, to be inhabiting the same space again. And just empathy, it's really hard. Make space for it to be difficult. Like it's so easy unwittingly to add pressure, like anytime we try to help, to add pressure to kids experience, like, well, this is what you expect of me and I can't. And it adds pressure and anxiety and makes it worse, even though we're just trying to help. Empathy and understanding and just making space for the difficulty, like, oh, it's okay for it to be hard, actually makes it easier than coming up with a plan and giving helpful suggestions. And again, every kid is different. So if your kid responds well to helpful suggestions, great, do it.
Great. I know we're almost at time, but we do have a few questions that are overlapping around. Let's see, what if when proposing a collaborative approach to screen time, the adolescent proposes that he or she wants to stay all day connected on the screen? How do you negotiate that? Right. So when the response is, I just want to be on the screen all the time.
So there's a number of different responses. First of all, I mean, I think sometimes we're afraid to ask the kid what their idea is because we think that's what the response is. And I would make space for you to be surprised. That's just been my experience. So I would make space for that. If your kid does say that, which they might, I would say in as joking a tone of voice as you can, you seriously think I'm going to go for that? What's your second proposal? Right? Because they're testing you. They're seeing like, if I push, is she going to get mad? Is he going to get mad? Like, can I use this as an opportunity to like test my control in this relationship, to be provocative? Don't get provoked. And meeting it with humor and saying like, okay, so what's your second idea? Because that idea is not a very good idea. Like, I'm not going to do that, even though I've been doing that. Like, let's have a different idea about this family. They know better than that, right? Like, they know like that's not going to be the end point.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you have time for one or two more?
Sure. Let's do one.
Okay, so thank you everybody for your questions. I'm sorry if we can't get to everyone's. Question just around, how do you help parents who have anxiety over the increasing violence in the city and providing autonomy to their teens who want to be outside with the warm weather and the city reopening?
Look, I think kids either don't feel the anxiety the way we do, or they feel the anxiety, but they're like, I don't care, right? Like, it's more fun. It's so much fun. I don't care. Or, like, I'm tough and I don't, nothing's bad's going to happen to me. So we also often don't share the same perspective as kids around this issue, and showing them, statistics or newspaper stories is unlikely to help. I think the leverage that you have is, look, I read the newspaper stories, I hear the gunshots, this happened to my friend's kid. I want to make sure that you have a really great summer. Let's talk about what you can do for me so I don't freak out around this. Again, like, I think we're scared to ask our kids to take care of us because we think we're not supposed to, because we think they're going to say, I don't care. They actually want to, they actually need to. And if you don't frame it as, I'm never letting you go out of the house, but instead say, I want you to enjoy your summer and be with your friends, what ideas do you have for how to do this so that I'm not scared to death? You will have a conversation. And it will be exactly that, a conversation, a back and forth.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And again, thank you everyone for your great questions. I'm sorry if we were not able to get to everyone's, but please do come back if you check out our website, we have every month, we'll be offering a new workshop that is free and at different times. So if this time was challenging, hopefully you can make some other times, but Michael, thank you so much for offering your insights and expertise, and really, really appreciate you sharing them and for everyone's time tonight.
Thanks to all of you. Have a great summer.
Thank you.